can see that on page, 17 of your binder. What has been the best news that you have received this year, maybe this month, or this week? That we're staying in Australia on the arrival of our visa, that's for sure. We can probably call it like one of the best news of the year, I suppose. Anyone else? Something really amazing.
Citizenship.
Huh?
Citizenship.
Your citizenship. Anyone else? Really good news, like, yeah. Huh?
Not yet.
Not yet? No good news? I'm not talking about the gospel, I'm talking about good news. Something that happened in your life. Anything?
New job.
New job. Yeah. Absolutely. Those can be victory, yes?
And cancer free for 4 years.
Cancer free for 4 years. Beautiful. Good news is something that we all need every now and then, right? You will see, as I'm going to connect good news in the biblical sense of the word, the gospel, is a word that we probably have heard here and there, good news. Also how it relates to identity. Last week, what did I say about identity? What is identity? It's a very simple question, actually. Who am I? That's the question. Who am I? And the gospel, a big part, not everything, but a big part, as an answer to that question, who am I? The gospel tries to answer. Now that may not always be super clear. Sometimes you think like, what has identity to do with the gospel? I mean, I thought the gospel was something, but I cannot always see the connection with identity. Don't worry, I have not seen that connection for 25 years. And for me, I was trying to figure out the gospel in many different ways, but I could never connect it some way to identity. Who am I as a person? So I'm going to give you a couple of snapshots from the gospel. And the first one you know for sure. What about this snapshot of the gospel? It's something that you can just listen to it. It says this in John 3 verse 16 to 18. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. It's particularly the first verse, the first part that I said, that many people know. It's very familiar. A snapshot, a little image of the gospel. Alright? I'm going to give you a second one. And it says in Romans 5, verse 8 and 9. You can probably accompany it in the binder. It says this. But God demonstrates his own love toward us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Much more than, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath, or wrath, some people say it like that, through him. Alright? So you have two snapshots, like pictures in your mind, or that I'm sharing in a few verses, that capture actually the idea of the gospel pretty good. But here's the thing, and last week I spoke a lot about it. It's one thing to me to say that to you and you to listen to that. It's another thing for you to actually hear what it's saying. Remember what I was saying last week about that we sometimes listen or observe or interpret through a certain perspective. We have all our glasses on that nobody can see, not even ourselves. It's those little things that we say to ourselves or little things that people said to us, whether we were young or even older in some ways. And then Jesus actually said many times about it. Like, he who has an ear, let him hear. It meant that not everybody that was listening to what he was saying was actually understanding what he was saying. And that's interesting. There is a Greek philosopher, I forgot his name, maybe the historians here, they will know. He said something like this. It's impossible to learn something that he thinks he already knows. Try to explain that to, let's say, a rebellious teenager that knows everything. Anybody knows a person like that? I'm not talking to my own children here at all. Maybe you were that person yourself, and your dad or your mom was trying to make a point in your life, and you said like, come on, and you think you already know it, and then you're a couple of years, or sometimes decades down the line, and then you realize, I actually didn't know the first thing about it. It's impossible to learn something that you already think you know. Now there are many people that heard that Christianity and that heard Christianity in church, and perhaps even about the gospel and that kind of stuff. But it doesn't always mean that they have a good understanding of what the good news is really about. Again, it has to do with these filters that I was talking about, the things that we made ourselves and we don't even realize we're saying it to ourselves. It's become the second voice that we're so incredibly familiar with. For instance, one of the tags that I put on myself, I didn't share that with you last week, was the fact that by being an extreme introvert by nature, a lot of people thought that I was always living in my own little shell, my own little world. That people thought that I had ADD. You know what ADD means? Attention Deficit Disorder. So I'm in my own little world. I could play chess against myself for hours on end, doing puzzles hours on end. People could be talking, standing right next to me, and I wouldn't hear the first thing whatsoever, because I was in my own little cocoon, my own little world. To the point that a few friends, already early in life and even later on in life, said like, oh, I think you have ADD. It's not the thing with hyperactive when you're jumping all around, but that's ADHD exactly. But it's certainly something that I see in you. And I kind of internalized that into my life for many years. I'm like, yeah, well, I guess that's who I am. I am an ADD person, and people just have to deal with it because that's who I am, period. That became a filter. That's the little tape that you keep on telling to yourself, and that sometimes prevents you from hearing something that God is actually trying to say about your life. People don't do that because they're evil people. I didn't do that because I wanted to embrace it in some ways. It just happened over time. And the thing is also true for the gospel. Like sometimes people embrace a version of the gospel which they think is the good news, while it's actually not really the way Jesus and all the others are explaining the gospel in the Bible. I call them also gospel distortions. It's not necessarily because people are evil and they try to sell you a false message. It's just a message that they probably received either from their parents, from their pastor, from their church. There was not necessarily malintent in it, but it wasn't necessarily the gospel that Jesus was sharing. And I put a couple of them down. You can read them on page 18. I'm going really quick through them. A couple of versions, I call them distortions, that are, let me put it like this. There might be some truth in it, in one or the other, but it's not the full picture, and that is still a problem. So the first one I'm going to give really quick, and they're all isms, is formalism. So the gospel is something like this. You believe in God, and then you go to church, baby. You go to church, you're in church, and you're going to pay your tithes and offerings. You read the Bible a little bit. You sing a couple of songs. You have no idea what you're singing, but you're going to sing those songs. And then you go home. And that's good news. Well, ask the people out on the streets if they interpret that as good news. Probably not. Probably they look at something like, well, I'm not so much in for that. Another one that we know very well, maybe we were raised in that way, or we were maybe fought to that in an extent, is legalism. The gospel of legalism is a little bit like this. If you pray that prayer, that's great. Now you go to heaven. But make sure that you don't swear, don't lie, don't cheat, don't do this, don't do that. And make sure that you do this, and that you do that, and that you do this, and that you do that. And that doesn't sound like very good news either, does it? No. Now let me give you a few other ones as well. I won't give you all of them. Another beautiful